saying it's unclear why the helicopter on a nighttime training flight failed to see the airliner.
The people in the helicopter should have seen where they were going.
Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth says there was some sort of elevation issue with the helicopter that is being investigated. At the White House, Jared Halpern, Fox News.
Loudoun County, Virginia Public Schools says several plane crash victims were former students. The school district is offering mental health services for children who may need help processing the tragedy. President Trump's pick to lead the FBI, Kash Patel, appeared before the Senate Judiciary Committee for his confirmation hearing today. Committee Chairman Chuck Grassley of Iowa sang his praises, claiming he can lead the agency, which faces low approval ratings.
Mr. Patel has precisely the qualifications we need at this time when the FBI is not being respected by our public.
Patel insisted that he did not have an enemies list and that the Bureau under his leadership would not seek retribution against the president's adversaries or launch investigations for political purposes. In other hearing news, Director of National Intelligence nominee Tulsi Gabbard criticized the Democrat narrative that she is a puppet for U.S. and world leaders, saying she is loyal only to God, the Constitution, and her own conscience in her opening remarks before the Senate Intelligence Committee today. Hamas terrorists freed 8 hostages today as part of the ceasefire in the Gaza Strip, but the chaotic handover of some of the captives, who were shuttled through a rowdy crowd of thousands by masked terrorists, drew an angry protest from Israel. Israel plans to release 110 Palestinian prisoners later in the day, but that was put on hold by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who demanded the mediators assure the safe exit for hostages going forward. Among President Trump's many executive orders is one that protects children from chemical and surgical gender manipulation procedures. Meg Kilgannon, FRC Senior Fellow for Education Studies, join Washington Watch.
This executive order is beautiful. The language in it is wonderful. It's very well written. It's very clear. And it protects parents. It protects children. It ends the reliance on junk science and will stop the promotion of using the WPATH guidelines, the World Professional Association of Transgender Health.
She said it also directs the federal government to review the research into the effects of such treatments.
Senator Hawley has already introduced a bill to protect children against child abuse of these procedures. And I know there'll be other legislation introduced. It's really a wonderful time to think about the possibilities now with this baseline of executive order language to work from.
She said pulling funding from entities that support such procedures is a big part of the order and says it's a big win. Rain and storms will move across parts of the South, including the Gulf Coast today. Flash flood warnings and severe storm warnings were issued for parts of the Dallas-Fort Worth area this morning. Flash flooding is also possible for parts of the Arklatex into the mid-Mississippi Valley. The Storm Prediction Center says strong to isolated severe storms are possible today into tonight from eastern parts of Texas and across the lower Mississippi Valley. Fox Weather's Jane Menard talks about the storms as they head east into the Deep South today and this evening.
This line of storms as it progresses out of Houston into Louisiana, Mississippi, the timeline here then starts to get tricky, right? Because now we're talking 11 o'clock at night, after dark. And while the severe weather risk should start to wane once we get into that sunset hour through the overnight, it's not zero. Right? No. And we are expecting to see storms reignite along the Gulf Coast as we get into the day on Friday.
See more news at afn.net. I'm Robert Thornton.
American Family Association believes in the sanctity of human life.
AFA Executive Vice President Ed Vitagliano.
We've dedicated an entire edition of The Stand to the pro-life issue. Learn more about adoption, foster care, and even infertility and the technological solutions to that heartbreaking issue.
It's available now at afa.net/The Stand. Click on The Stand, print version.
Hello, and welcome to the Dr. Nurse Mama Show, prescribing hope for healthy families here on American Family Radio. Here's your host, Professor, Pediatric Nurse Practitioner, and Mom of 4, Dr. Jessica Peck.
Well, hey there, friends, and welcome to my favorite time of the afternoon, getting to spend time with you, prescribing hope for healthy families. Our prescription today is all about reading to your children. This is something that is so simple, but that is so needed. And in today's world of screen saturation, yes, we do have access to some good digital media, but nothing beats a good snuggle, sitting next to your kids, reading out loud, turning the pages, looking at all of the bright colors. It's so good for their development. It is so good for your relationship. And that's what we're talking about. But before we get into that, let me tell you, I am convicted because maybe today you are feeling weary. Maybe it's the weight of work, of parenting, just the everyday struggles of life. Maybe you're just burdened by seeing all of the bad news that is on TV. Of course, our hearts go out to those who were impacted by the plane crash, and those images are just absolutely devastating to watch. And we certainly will pray for all of those involved and are so grateful for the first responders. Maybe it's just life feels heavy and you're wondering, am I doing enough? Am I being enough? Are things ever going to get easier? Is this season just now become my life? I don't know if you feel that way. I feel that way. And if that is you, I want to remind you of this simple truth. You are not alone. Scripture tells us in Isaiah 41, do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. God is with us. He is with you wherever you go, and he sees your struggles. He hears your prayers, the ones that are whispered and that are just almost too painful to say out loud, those shouts of just need. And even on the days when you feel like you're falling apart, his grace is enough. So I want you to take a deep breath. The same God who made the universe, who spoke the world into existence, who calms the seas, who knows every tear on your head, who bottles every tear that you cry, knows every hair on your head. He is holding you and your family right now. And today it's important, as every day is, to lean into that hope, trading our worries for worship, trading our stress for surrender, trading our fear for faith. Because no matter what you're facing, God's love is greater. His mercy is new every morning, and he is writing a story of redemption for you. You are doing better than you think, I promise. Just keep showing up. Keep showing up here for encouragement. Keep loving, keep believing, keep working, because God is still working, sometimes in the quiet and sometimes in the chaos, but always with purpose. And these are the messages that we need to give our kids. And I was talking to one of my children the other day, and they said, Mom, it just seems like you're on the struggle bus. And I said, yep, I definitely am. But God is driving. And I'm very confident in that. I'm just going to sit here and wait until he stops and lets me off. And I know who holds that future. And those are the kinds of messages of hope that we need to give to our kids. And so I'm so delighted today to have back on the show Valerie Ellis, who's going to tell you how you can give those kinds of messages to your kids. Just like I gave to you, how do we encourage our kids in their faith? Valerie is a children's book author, a speaker. She's a co-founder of the multi-author blog, Our Everyday Parables. We've shared that with you before. That has book reviews and parenting resources. And she wrote a beautiful Lift the Flap Christmas book that we shared, Share the Joy, when she was on last time, and her husband, Josh, who is also in ministry. And today she has a new book to talk to us about. And we're so excited to hear about it. So Valerie, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Well, tell us all about your new book.
So Let's Go Bible Adventures uses modern transportation to tell Bible stories. And you might be thinking, how does that work? Well, it gets kids interested in Bible stories by asking silly questions. So they see the intro of a Bible story, and then there's a silly question. Did God save Jonah with a submarine? No. He used a big fish. And then there's 40 stories, all with that kind of theme. And then they get to learn about not just the ancient transportation, but also the miracles of God and God's strength and love for them.
Well, how did you get inspired to write this? Because I think kids love silly questions. It's a great way to laugh. And especially in this world today that everything is so serious, I think silly questions are a great way to build bonds and to make Bible stories fun and come to life. So how did you come up with the idea for that?
Yes, so it actually started with the vehicles as the idea, even though I agree with you. I think silly questions are great for disarming kids and just making our homes more pleasant and fun and engaging their imagination. But I had a toddler who was obsessed with vehicles. And you all know how kids can get with vehicles, construction trucks, trains. And I learned so many vocabulary words that I never thought I would need to know. And then when it came to reading time, he also loved books. But when I would pull out a Bible book, it would just get the toddler veto. He was like, no, give me those car books. And so one day, it sounds silly, but it was also a sincere prayer of my heart. I said, Lord, why aren't there cars and trucks and trains in the Bible? That would just make my job as a mom who wants to point her kids to faith so much easier. And I kind of laughed at myself. But then I started thinking, I wonder if there is a way to engage them in that way. And so that's where the silly questions came in, because I knew as a mom, the last thing I would want is for a Bible story to be tampered with. That is not, like what I wanted to bring to my kids, where I would have to end up reteaching them something. But then I thought, well, if we just ask silly questions, like, now, did Noah take a cruise ship with all those animals? And then the kids get to be the smart ones and turn the page and say, no, it was the ark. Don't you know, Mom and Dad? So it's just a really fun way to get kids not just enjoying Bible stories, but hopefully actually asking, read this book to me.
Well, I love that, because you're right, Valerie. Trucks and trains have a little more allure to kids than oxen carts or whatever else might be in the Bible, those modes of transportation. And kids are so fascinated with things that go. And I also like that it gives them confidence, because, that's a great way to answer questions that are contrary to our faith. It's a great way, I think, to introduce them to them developmentally, because we even think about, what Satan said to Eve in the garden. Did God really say, and it's that same kind of question concept. Hey, did God really say, is this what's true about your faith? And saying, no, I know this. And having some of that confidence, I think, is just beautiful. Well, tell us a little bit. The book is called Let's Go Bible Adventures, which is so cute and catchy. I just absolutely love it. I'm already wishing that I had grandchildren. Oh, now my children are all growing. They're like, Mom, oh my gosh, that's so embarrassing. But I will find kids to read this too. But tell us a little bit more about the behind the scenes process and how everything went.
Sure. So each story is 8 rhyming lines. And so that part has stayed from the beginning. But now they also have a little fun fact at the end and a refrain. So each story ends with something, and then it says, we're on an adventure with God, let's go. With the idea that, by the time you've read it with your kids, they'll be saying that part. Jesus loves me, this I know, we're on an adventure with God, let's go. So when I started writing it, there were actually only 4 stories. And I thought, well, I found all the stories that I could with transportation that would be engaging for kids. But then as I've gotten, as I got feedback from editors and critique partners, they really pushed me to no, there's more. You could go further with this, to where then we started including stories that didn't just have an ancient transportation counterpart, like the wise men and camels, but also the reveal could be a miracle of God. So for example, did Jesus feed the 5,000 with food trucks? I mean, did they have tacos and barbecue? And being from Texas, I had to work that in.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
No. God did a miracle. A boy shared his lunch, and although it was small, Jesus made more food, enough food for all. So the reveal can sometimes be just a miracle of God, or someone finding their strength in God.
I love that. So how does sharing these stories help our relationships with our kids and help them to be closer to God? It seems like it would just make sense, and we know it, but we don't often do it, especially when life is so busy. And, Valerie, I might step on some toes here, but I'm willing to be brave, because I think I didn't grow up. I didn't raise my kids when they were really little. We didn't have this digital access like we do now. And I think it would be really easy just to push play on a screen, or just have somebody else read it to them, have that interaction. And that does have its time and place. I mean, there's laundry that needs to be done. I remember those early days of parenting. But telling our kids the stories in our own voice with that interactive relationship moment, how do those help us to grow closer to our kids and point them to God?
Yes, well, I can get really excited about this and talk about it for a long time. I mean, the moment of just sitting with your child, and whether it's cuddling up or if you're sitting across the table eating a snack or whatever it is, just having that one-on-one time, that eye contact, it really meets needs that kids never grow out of, which are security and affection. And so that, in and of itself is easy to do. We don't have to think about, now I'm going to meet my child's needs for security and affection. We just open a book and it's happening. And it doesn't always have to look like that. It can also be like they get tired after 2 pages and then you start acting it out in a silly way, or you find a different spot to snuggle that might be more interesting to them. I know not every child is just running for books like my kids were, but there are ways to work it in, and it's so good for them. You kind of mentioned at the top, even developmentally, even turning that page and having that artwork really up close where they can investigate it. And then, you can also go deeper with questions and things like that to get them really engaged in the story. And that builds your relationship, because you're the one sharing it with them. Like you said, it's not a screen, or it's not someone reading, to them, but it's you. And that really builds memories.
Well, how do you use those memories and those times together to spark conversation? Because that's important too. You want to read the story and the truth of the story, but there are questions that come from that and other conversations that can springboard from that based on how they receive it, how they react. And so how do you use those moments of connection to further the conversation?
Right. So that's really important. And I think that was a part that I actually skipped a lot as a parent, because my kids loved rhyming books, and I would just get caught up in the rhyme and keep reading and reading until the book was over, and then the end. But, stopping to look at the pictures and point to things when they're really small, and then as they get older, even, just stopping and saying like, oh, that part surprised me, or I wonder what's going to happen next. It doesn't always have to be a deep lesson that you're stopping to talk about. You're building that relationship by just getting their input. But then sometimes you can go deeper, and you can ask something like, oh, well, where do you see God in this situation or in this picture? And just trying to get kids to build the habit of looking for spiritual lessons or looking for God's goodness in all kinds of situations, because, they're not always going to be surrounded by spiritual things all the time. They won't always be in that context, but we can help them build that habit. And often when I would ask that of my kids, I just have to be honest, they would just sometimes just look at me like, good, I don't know. And then I would find myself being like, well, I don't really know either, but we're building the habit of looking for God. We're building the habit of asking those questions and, getting each other's input. And that is really important. So I would say, to encourage any parent, if you try this and it's not working at first, just to keep going, because building that habit is part of the memories and part of the bonding that they'll take from the situation.
Valerie, you remind me of the time when one of my kids was younger, and my husband and I would read him Bible stories, and he had so many questions, and it was exactly like what you said, like thinking, oh wow, that is a really theologically tricky question. I don't even know that. So what we started doing, I have to give my husband all the credit for this. So we started keeping a notebook, and he said, hey, let's keep a notebook of all of these questions that you have. So we started writing them down. And then we called a friend who had a degree in, theology. I'm speaking outside of my knowledge here, but somebody who was way smarter than us, who was a pastor. And we said, hey, can we find lunch? We have some questions for you. And so my son sat down across from the pastor and opened the notebook and just started to ask questions and write answers. And he learned, and let me tell you, we learned a lot. It was such a great experience. And so if you're listening out there, Ben, Thanks again for letting us buy you lunch. That was really, really helpful. We are going to give away a copy of this book, Let's Go Bible Adventures, to the first caller at 888-589-8840. That's 888-589-8840. Valerie's here with me in studio. She will autograph it and write your name in the book. So call in, and we would love to share that with you. Don't go away. We'll be right back with more hope and reading with your kids.
One of my seminary